Welcome to Living Grace Evangelical Church, our live stream. So glad that you've joined us wherever you're at, whether it's Sunday morning or whether it's throughout the week. We're so happy that you're here. We're going to be starting worship here momentarily, so thank you so much for joining us, and have a blessed Sunday morning.
Water, you turn into wine. Open the eyes of the blind. There's no one like you. None like you. Into the darkness you shine. Out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you. None like you. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. Into the darkness you shine. Out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you. None like you. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God, and go. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what can stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what can stand against? Then what can stand against? Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. And one more time. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what can stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what can stand against? Then what can stand against?
atmosphere is changing now, for the Spirit of the Lord is here. The evidence is all around that the Spirit of the Lord is here. The atmosphere is changing now, for the Spirit of the Lord is here. The evidence is all around that the Spirit of the Lord is here. Overflow in this place. Fill our hearts with your love. Your love surrounds us. You're the reason we came to encounter your love. Your love surrounds us. The atmosphere is changing now, for the Spirit of the Lord is here. The evidence is all around that the Spirit of the Lord is here. Overflow in this place. Fill our hearts with your love. Your love surrounds us. You're the reason we came to encounter your love. Your love surrounds us. Overflow in this place. Fill our hearts with your love. Your love surrounds us. You're the reason we came to encounter your love. Your love surrounds us. Spirit of God, fall fresh on us. We need your presence. Your kingdom come, your will be done, here as in heaven. Spirit of God, fall fresh on us. We need your presence. Your kingdom come, your will be done, here as in heaven. A miracle can happen now, for the Spirit of the Lord is here. The evidence is all around that the Spirit of the Lord is here.
So we're in the final stretch of our series, Relinquish, and we've been in 1 Timothy chapter 6. And 1 Timothy is a letter written from the Apostle Paul to Timothy, who is this young pastor, this young leader in this major trade city in the Roman Empire, the city of Ephesus, which is in modern-day Turkey. And so Paul is writing this letter to encourage Timothy in his leadership, but he's also writing to deal with some bad teaching that's been kind of going on there, and it's resulted in issues within the church, and it's caused people to be discouraged in their faith, and it's led people to have destructive ideas and beliefs and behaviors. And so what Paul has been doing and what we've been seeing here in 1 Timothy chapter 6 is he's been encouraging the church to relinquish those bad behaviors and ideas and beliefs. Relinquish means to let go of, to release, and to embrace God's very best for them, to embrace an eternal perspective rather than a temporary perspective or a perspective that's worldly. And so today we're going to be looking at 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17. And so to kind of recap from last week, what happened is Paul was addressing the issues of the church, and then he kind of turned his attention to Timothy to give him some encouragement. And we talked about how, like a good mentor, a good coach, Paul begins kind of cheering on Timothy. And so he's encouraging him to, relinquish, to let go of the temporary, to embrace the eternal. And he kind of ends that section in verses kind of 15 through 16, really kind of in this doxology, this praise, this moment of praise where he's exalting Jesus, and it's kind of this glimpse of heaven, basically. And so he summarizes from that eternal perspective, and then it's kind of like he comes down from that, and then he turns his attention back to some of the people in the church, and he really kind of hones in here on a specific group of people. And in verse 17, we begin to see that specific group of people. It says, as for the rich in this present age. And so Paul he begins to zero in on those who were within the church who were rich in this present age. And it's kind of interesting because if we were to contemporize this, if Paul were writing to any other time in history or any other group of people in history, if he were writing to us today, he would probably have the same kind of language that he would use towards us. I mean, if we think about this, we may be experiencing some financial hardship and trouble right now due to the current issues that we've been facing. But by and large, we live in a very blessed nation. Considering that, in the developing world, a family of 4 lives off of less than $1,000 a year. Some of us can't even live off $1,000 a month. $1,000 a year, and a group of a family of 4 lives off of that in developing nations. Or consider China, one of the most populous nations in the world. On average, a person makes $10,000 a year on average in China. And so that's put it in a little bit of a perspective for us. Many of us, we probably make at least 2 to 3 times that amount. But the reality is that we live in a very blessed nation, and by many accounts, we are rich. And Paul, he's writing this letter to people who were living in a very rich, wealthy city in the Roman Empire in Ephesus, and he's saying, for the rich in this present age. And he has something specific he wants to say to those people, and I think he has something specific he wants to say to us. And he gives 3 charges to those who are rich, and these 3 charges, I believe, really apply to us today. And so the 3 charges are, and I'm going to contemporize it for us, American Christians. I'm just going to say it that way. He's writing to rich people within the church, so I'm just going to say American Christians, and the charges are this: be humble. Trust in God, not in wealth. Put your hope in God, not in wealth. And then embrace hope in God. So those are the 2 things that are the 3 things that Paul is really encouraging these rich people and in this church. And I think by extension, he's in encouraging us, and he's challenging us with these same things. And so first, be humble. So let's read what he has to say here in verse 17. As for the rich in this present age, charge them or urge them not to be haughty. Now, what's that word haughty? It's kind of an interesting word. It carries with it the sense of pridefulness in oneself. It's kind of like snobbish, we might say, in our kind of contemporary lingo. And so these false teachers who held these wrong behaviors and beliefs, who chased after wealth and were seemingly, prideful and arrogant about gaining that wealth, the fruit that was produced from that focus was envy and slander and dissension. It was, all these things that we saw back in the very beginning part of chapter 6. And so Paul is saying, be humble. Be humble. And in everyday lingo, don't be stuck up because you're rich. That's kind of what Paul might say if he were just kind of contemporizing it. But, you might say, but Tyler, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, many people, they work hard for what they earn. And why shouldn't somebody take pride in that? Well, let's think about what the writer of Deuteronomy, Moses, has to say in chapter 8. And in Deuteronomy chapter 8, starting in verse 11, he says, take care. This is God speaking through Moses. Take care lest you forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his rules and his statutes, which I command you today, lest when you have eaten and are full and have built good houses and live in them, when your herds and flocks multiply and your silver and gold is multiplied and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart will be lifted up, prideful, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. He goes on to say in verse 17, beware, lest you say in your heart, my power and my might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. So that's pride. That's the heart being puffed up, being prideful about what one has. But he goes on to say, and he quantifies it, verse 18, you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth. See, pride, it's an easy thing for us to fall into. It leads into us to trust in ourselves, to worship ourselves, rather than to worship God and to trust in him. And like these false teachers that Paul is writing to kind of, correct their wrong teaching, these false teachers, their beliefs and their covetedness, their pridefulness about obtaining and seeking after wealth had led this church into some very rough and terrible places. It had shipwrecked these people's faiths. And so Paul is saying, don't let pride get in the way. And when such pride gets into my heart, it becomes that attitude and position of my heart. It can lead me to look down on others. It can lead me to be haughty. It can lead me to be snobbish. And it can lead me to look down on those who I would deem not as fortunate as myself. And we need to remember what Philippians 2 encourages us. And in Philippians 2, says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, i.e., don't be prideful, haughty, snobbish, but in humility, count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interest of others. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus. And he goes on to talk about how the humility of Christ is to be imitated in the life of the Christian. And this is in our actions, our attitudes, and it's especially relevant in how we treat and deal with the stuff that we have in our lives, with our possessions, with our wealth, with, the stuff, the things that we're blessed with. You see, if my perspective is that, it's all mine, I'm going to be prideful and arrogant and haughty. I'm going to have that kind of attitude. But Paul's admonition, his urging here is to not be haughty, to not have that snobbish outlook. And if we take into consideration and understand what Deuteronomy 8 is telling us, what Paul's telling us in Philippians 2 is that when we recognize the perspective that we have is that everything that we have is God's, and it's been given to us by God. When we have that perspective, it's impossible for pride to be in my heart. When I recognize that everything that I have is from God and is God's in the first place, how can I be prideful of that? How can I cling to that? How can I have anything but praise because of what God has given to me? And so the attitude of a heart that recognizes that God has given me everything, he has blessed me with everything, is one of humility. It's one of humbleness. It's one of praise. And so, American Christian, be humble. How is your heart posture when it comes to your possessions, your money, your stuff? Is your heart position in a place of pride, or is your heart position in a place of praise? So American Christian, be humble. Paul, if he was writing this to our context, the second thing that he would say is American Christian, place your hope in God, not in wealth. Place your hope in God, not in wealth. He goes on to say in verse 17, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God. If you have like your Bible open, or if you're taking notes, maybe underline that or write that down. Uncertainty of riches, because isn't that so true? I think our current situation in dealing with this coronavirus pandemic and kind of the economic fallout that's happened around the world, it illustrates the fleeting nature of wealth, of riches. It's estimated that the wealthiest people in the world lost around $220 billion. I can't even quantify that. I can't even I want to picture what that looks like, and I don't really know what it looks like. It's just, I can't wrap my mind around that figure, but $220 billion. There are 26 million estimated approximately who have filed for unemployment. The Dow Jones average in January and February was above 30,000. And in March, when all of this hit, it took such a dive that it was just above 19,000 in its standing. And so there was a huge loss. And as a result, 401ks, it's estimated, took about a 20% hit across the board. And so people were, lost 20% of their savings, their retirement savings, their 401ks. World economies basically are predicted to keep taking hits throughout this year. And economists are saying, there's a lot of ifs right now in their predictions for 2021. And so there's a lot of instability in the future. And if we place our hope and our trust in wealth, it's fleeting, it's uncertain. And you're probably, now not focusing on the message. You're probably thinking about all of the things that I just talked about. And maybe there's fear. Maybe there's, worry. Maybe you're just depressed right now because maybe, like many of us, we've probably been affected in some way, shape, or form by these statistics and more that I haven't even shared. But the reality is I want to challenge us, because this is the focus. This is the fate of really anyone whose security is on anything that's unstable, that's on worldly thing, that's places their trust, their hope in things of this world and not on God. And so for some of us, I think today the encouragement that maybe all of us need to hear is that we need to trust in the Lord more. We need to place our hope in the Lord more. This season, it's been especially trying for us, and maybe we just need to be reminded and maybe even encouraged today to place our hope, to place our trust in Jesus. The writer of Hebrews, in Hebrews 13:8, it says Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He doesn't change. Because he doesn't change, we can place our hope, our trust in him. Or think about what 1 Samuel 15:29 says. It says, God will not lie, nor will he change his mind, for he is not human that he should change his mind. God does not change his mind. He doesn't lie. God does not change. And because of that, we can place our hope and our trust on that secure foundation. And so my question for us is, and my challenge for us is to put your hope, put your trust in God. And forget about all this other stuff. Forget about the riches. Don't put your hope and your trust in those things, because ultimately they're going to let you down. And so maybe for some of us also, we need to be reminded to focus on the giver instead of the gifts. To focus on the giver instead of the gifts. And, I want us to consider a parable that Jesus told that I think helps us to kind of put this in perspective. It's found in Luke 12, verses 13 through 21. And Jesus says this: someone in the crowd said to him, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. But he said to him, Man, who made me a judge or arbiter over you? And he said to them, Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And he told them a parable, saying, The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, What shall I do, for I have nowhere to store my crops? And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. But God said to him, Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. See, this passage, the main teaching of it illustrates the uncertainty of riches for sure, but it also illustrates, the folly, really, the foolishness of being rich towards oneself and not towards God. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a savings account or you shouldn't store up things or that you shouldn't have a 401k or anything like that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have those things, but we shouldn't place our hope and our security in the future on those things because it's uncertain. It's not a sure and certain foundation. And when we recognize that God has blessed us with those things, when our heart posture is one of praise, recognizing that God has enabled us to have those things, and that He's not only enabled us to have those things, but we can put our hope and our trust in Him, recognizing He is the giver of those gifts. And when we have that heart posture, we recognize those things. It should cause us to seek to invest in things that matter in light of eternity. And that's what this parable is illustrating. And so I want to ask us a question. How does the things that you have, whether it be your possessions, your stuff, your wealth, whatever it might be, how do those things that you choose to do with those things, really, how does that illustrate your level of trust or where you place your hope? And so if Paul were writing this to, a modern day American church, much like he was writing to a wealthy city in Ephesus in the Roman Empire, and he would say, American Christian, place your hope in God, not in wealth. And then the final thing that he would charge us or urge us is he would say, American Christian, enjoy what God gives you. Enjoy what God gives you. And so, again, verse 17, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. Maybe circle that word richly. It's such an interesting thing because the rich in this present age, it's contrasting, the temporal richness with the eternal richness of God, who richly gives things for our enjoyment. It reminds me of what Jesus said when he talks about you do not receive because you do not ask, and he talks about how, we who are evil give good gifts to our children, and how much does God want to richly bless and give good gifts to those who ask him, who are his children, right? And so that principle that God wants us to enjoy what he blesses us with. And so many times, we fall into the ideology or the superstition of materialism. The more stuff I get, the more wealth I have, the more XYZ I get, that I'm going to be happy. The grass is greener on the other side. And we fall into this superstition of materialism that is empty, that never even allows us to enjoy the things that we do have because we're always seeking for the next better and best thing. And so the challenge here is that, a heart that is constantly recognizing that God has richly blessed, his follower, that he has richly blessed us with the things that we have. And that when our hope and our security, our trust is placed in God and not in those things that we have, it enables us to enjoy the things that we have rather than worry about getting more or getting the better and best things. It's kind of like, the movie where, it's the stereotypical movie, right? The stereotypical chick flick where, the guy he's looking for something, he's searching for something, or the girl is searching for something. She's searching for that perfect mate, and she's overlooking that person that's, right next to her that, that's not the person. I'm looking for this best thing or this better thing. And all the while, the person who they need to be with is right there with them, right? And then all of a sudden, it's like the scales fall off their eyes, and like they realize like what they've been searching for is right in front of their face the whole time. You know what I mean? Yeah, I don't really watch that many chick flicks, but the reality is it's a common thing. And I think we do the same thing with the gifts that God gives us, is right? We can be so fixated and we don't even enjoy the things that we have because we're always searching for more. And so Paul, he's saying to this wealthy town, these wealthy people in this town, enjoy what God has given you. And he's saying that to us, American Christian, enjoy what God gives you. So we might feel that amassing that security and that wealth might, give us that security in the end, but ultimately maybe we find out that, it's ultimately bankrupt. It's ultimately never going to fulfill us. And so I was reading a story, and I thought it was rather, telling of what we were talking about. So I'm gonna retell this story in closing today. There was a wealthy man and his only son, and they loved to collect paintings together, Picassos and Rembrandts and Monets. And so they were, collecting all of these rare and wonderful paintings. And, during the Vietnam War, the son was called to war. And in the course of being at war, he was fatally wounded and died. He died while he was saving the life of his fellow soldiers. And so the father was, as you can imagine, torn apart, and he mourned the loss of his only son. About a month later, a young fellow showed up at this man's door and explained that, he was a soldier that his son was saving when he was shot and killed. And he said to the father, I know the pain that you're experiencing, and your son was a great person, and I wanted to give you a gift, an expression of my thanks for your son. And so he hands him this box that he was carrying, and the father opens it up, and he finds in it a painting that this soldier had done of his son. It wasn't amazing quality. It wasn't like a Monet, or it wasn't like a Rembrandt, but it was drawn, and it was heartfelt, and it was sincere. And the father, this collector of wonderful and special pieces, put that painting of his son done by that soldier on his mantle. And every time a person came or people came to his house, instead of directly going to all the special favorite pieces of Picasso or Rembrandt or Monet, he took them to that mantle and he showed them his prized portrait of his son. Well, the father eventually passed away, and having no son to give his estate to, it fell to auction. And so the auction began, and on the podium sat the portrait of the son. And so the auctioneer banged the gavel to start off the bidding, and as you can imagine, all of these wealthy and awesome people showed up who just really wanted to purchase these rare and immaculate paintings done by very famous people. And so they were excited, let's get the bidding started. But here's this portrait of this son sitting up there, and they were kind of offended by it. And the auctioneer started off the betting. Who will bid $200 for this portrait of the son? And everybody was kind of scoffing at this. No one raised their hand. And well, what about $100? And people became agitated. Where's the good stuff? Bring out the good stuff. And this went on and on and on, the people becoming more and more agitated, until finally someone spoke up and says, I will give $10 for the portrait. And, the auctioneer just kept trying to bring up the bid, but it wouldn't. Nobody wanted to bid on it. They were offended more and more. They wanted the Rembrandts. They wanted the Picassos. And so the winning bid finally was a $10 bid by the lifelong gardener of this man, of his estate, who wasn't very wealthy, and $10 was all he had to give. And so finally someone from the crowd heckled, bring out the Monets, bring out the good stuff. And the auctioneer said, I'm sorry, this is the end of the auction. And everybody was kind of taken aback. And he said, no, a special clause in the will was that the son's portrait, whoever bought that portrait, inherited the entire estate and the prized, paintings and everything with it, because they took the son. God richly blesses us in so many ways, but the most amazing blessing is the richness of his grace and mercy that's given to us through Jesus. Especially during this time, where there's so much uncertainty, there's so many questions about what's going to happen next, and what's going to happen, are my needs going to be met? Is there going to be shortages of this? Or there, is my 401k, is it ever going to be rebound or whatever? The reality that I want us to ask, and I want us to challenge us with, is where is your hope at? Is your hope in your financial security, or is it in Jesus? See, the big idea that I want us to walk away with today is to relinquish financial security and to embrace hope in God? Is your hope entirely on God? Is your hope entirely in Jesus? Nothing else will ever truly satisfy. Nothing else is that secure foundation. Whoever takes the Son gets everything. And that's a very true statement that we see in Scripture time and time again. God wants to richly bless you. Next week, we're going to be looking at our last segment, and where Paul continues addressing those who are rich in this present age. And there's some very applicable things that Paul wants to challenge us with, as we, in many respects are very rich indeed, even though we may not be, even though we may be struggling, even though we may have financial insecurity right now. We're still very rich by many standards in the world, and Paul has something special to say for us. And so hope you'll join us next week. Thank you so much for joining the live stream this morning. And we're praying and we're hoping for good weather next weekend for our tailgate service. It's going to be at 11 o'clock a.m., so a little different than 10 o'clock, what we normally been doing, but 11 o'clock just to facilitate and give some extra time for our crews to set up and get everything prepared. But we're going to be meeting next week for our tailgate service, May 24th at 11 o'clock at the Heights residence. It's in Neapolis, and we sent out an email. If you need directions or an address, please email me at pt@lgechurch.email. We're really excited about the tailgate service. We're going to have an extended time of worship. We're going to wrap up our series, Relinquish, with a message from 1 Timothy 6, verses 18 through 19. And we're going to have a time of communion. We're going to provide prepackaged communion elements as you drive in. It's going to be a drive-in style worship service to sit in or around your car. And we're going to provide, prepackaged. But if you don't like the prepackaged stuff, we encourage you to bring your own grape juice and your own crackers. So we're going to have communion, and we're going to have a car horn salute for our 2020 graduates. And so really excited to be able to recognize and just cheer on our graduates and give them something special. And so we're asking all of our graduates of 2020 of college and high school to come. If you have your cap and gown, you can wear that. That would be wonderful. And we'll invite you to come up on stage, and you get to space out a little bit and enjoy the ruckus, because you deserve it. And so we're hoping that you can join us for our tailgate service. We'll also be live streaming that as well. And so if you're unable to make it, we'll be live streaming it. But again, it'll be at 11 o'clock on Sunday, May 24th, instead of 10 o'clock. And so that's just for this special event. But we hope that you'll be able to join us. Have a wonderful week.